Tonight we begin with a revelation that Western intelligence officials had feared, dismissed, and ultimately prepared for, a development that unfolded not over months or years, but in mere hours. Hours that exposed one of the most chilling military programs since the Cold War. Hours that forced urgent recalculations across NATO capitals. Hours that ended with a precision strike deep inside occupied territory. What the Kremlin did today crossed a line that the international community had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, resolve, and devastating effectiveness. What you're about to hear is not speculation, it is not rumor, it is a convergence of intelligence from multiple Western agencies, now confirmed by sources within the Pentagon, Britain's MI6, and Ukraine's own military intelligence directorate. The Kremlin was developing a bioweapon program targeted for deployment in 2026, and tonight the architect of that program is dead. For 18 months now, there had been signals, not official government statements, not formal intelligence assessments, just signals, that Russia was preparing something unprecedented. Russia has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a predictability. Military analysts in Washington, London, and Brussels had grown accustomed to reading Moscow's intentions through observable patterns, troop movements, procurement orders, communications intercepts. But what set off alarm bells in Langley this spring was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence officers who monitor Russian military research facilities know the indicators, the increased security perimeters, rotation of specialized personnel, the sudden classification upgrades on previously accessible documents, the movement of refrigerated transport vehicles to remote installations. All of that went quiet. And whenever Russia goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. For months, Western intelligence agencies have been tracking anomalies at 3 specific research facilities, 2 near Yekaterinburg and 1 in the Novosibirsk region. These facilities on paper were classified as agricultural research centers, but satellite imagery told a different story. Armed perimeters, biohazard disposal units, personnel with backgrounds not in agriculture, but in military epidemiology, the kind of backgrounds that don't appear on public records, the kind of backgrounds that only surface when someone makes a mistake or when someone talks. Early this week, British intelligence detected what they described as a critical security breach within Russia's defense establishment, including documentation that had not been accessed by foreign agencies in over 30 years. These are the kinds of assets that Russia only protects when they are signaling something very specific: strategic advantage, operational readiness, or imminent deployment. NATO analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Russia was changing its biological warfare posture. And when a nuclear-armed state shifts its unconventional weapons posture without explanation, even by incremental measures, every intelligence agency on the planet pays attention. The documents, now partially declassified by Ukrainian intelligence, paint a disturbing picture. Russia had reactivated components of its Soviet-era biological weapons program, the same program that was supposedly dismantled under the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. But it was never fully dismantled. Instead, it was fragmented, distributed across civilian research institutions, and hidden behind layers of bureaucratic deniability. The program's new code name was Zimnyaya Volna, Winter Wave. Its objective, the development of a genetically modified pathogen designed to target specific ethnic populations while leaving others unaffected. The target date for initial field testing, early 2026, and the man overseeing this program, the architect of Winter Wave, was a name that had appeared on intelligence watch lists for nearly 2 decades. General Viktor Morozov. The warning issued by Western intelligence officials tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not symbolic, it was urgent. Briefing after briefing described Russia's move as reckless, unprecedented, and perhaps most importantly, existential in its implications. Intelligence officials made clear that the development of ethnic targeting bioweapons represented a threshold that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most surgically precise operations we've seen in modern warfare. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of receiving confirmation of General Morozov's location, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate launched a coordinated strike operation. These weren't standard artillery attacks. These were deep penetration, special operations, assets that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to eliminate a high-value target with absolute certainty. The operation involved drone reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and ground-based assets operating behind enemy lines. General Morozov was located at a secured compound near Donetsk, a facility that Russian military intelligence believed was beyond Ukraine's operational reach. They were wrong. Tonight, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry confirmed that Special Operations Forces launched a multi-vector assault on Russian command positions, including a fortified bunker complex that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was a high-level strategic planning session. Ukraine struck before Russia could relocate the target. They hit the primary communications hub. They hit the secondary escape route. They hit the security detachment that was likely preparing to evacuate General Morozov to a safer location. In other words, Ukraine targeted the entire support infrastructure surrounding the bioweapon program's architect, the network that would have made continued development operational. This is what made Western intelligence's warning so urgent. Russia's bioweapon program wasn't just theoretical, it was actionable. It represented the kind of capability that could reshape the nature of warfare itself if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't broadcast their intentions. They didn't wait for diplomatic channels to fail. They hit the architect. They hit his support network. They dismantled the operational command structure in a single night. According to sources within Ukraine's military intelligence, General Morozov was killed instantly when a precision-guided munition struck the bunker's command center at approximately 3:47 local time. 3 other senior officers were killed in the same strike. None of them appeared on public Russian military rosters. All of them, according to intercepted communications, were directly involved in the Winter Wave program. And here's where the story becomes even more disturbing. Western intelligence officials now believe that Russia's bioweapon program was designed to test the resolve of NATO after months of perceived Western hesitation over military aid. Russia wanted to see whether the West would accept gradual escalation toward unconventional weapons. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't accept. They launched an operation that was so swift, so coordinated, that even Russian military command appeared caught off guard. You don't catch Russia's intelligence apparatus off guard easily, but tonight Ukraine did. Former intelligence officers speaking with Western media under anonymity described Russia's bioweapon development as a deterrence hedge, a way to ensure that even if the conventional war turned against them, they would retain leverage. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and willing to neutralize such leverage before it becomes operational. Their strikes were not only precise, they were timed so perfectly that Russian forces had no opportunity to implement evacuation protocols. That timing matters because it shows Ukraine's intelligence network has penetrated deeper into Russian command structures than Moscow realized. It shows that Ukraine is not merely defending territory, they are dismantling Russia's ability to escalate. Reports continued coming in throughout the night. We learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian special forces carried out simultaneous raids on 3 separate locations, forcing Russian units to divert resources away from frontline positions. Ukrainian cyber units targeted encrypted communication networks that had been operational in the last 72 hours. Ukrainian drone squadrons operating deep behind enemy lines reportedly destroyed a mobile laboratory used by Russia to transport biological research samples. This wasn't just a targeted assassination, this wasn't just a military operation. This was strategic decapitation, this was capability denial, and capability denial is the one thing Russia has struggled to counter since this war began. For every advance they have made, Ukraine has countered with something that undermines Russia's strategic calculus. Tonight was no different, except tonight the stakes were higher than they have ever been. Remember, Russia thought Western unity would fracture within months. They thought Ukraine would collapse before winter 2022. They thought the threat of unconventional weapons would paralyze Western decision-making. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Western intelligence sharing has reached unprecedented levels of coordination. Ukraine's operational capabilities have exceeded every pre-war assessment, and Russia's unconventional weapons program has been dealt a blow that will take years to recover from. The architect is dead, the command network is disrupted, and the 2026 deployment timeline is almost certainly no longer viable. What makes this moment so significant and so dangerous is that Russia's bioweapon program was exposed at a time when Vladimir Putin is under immense internal pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic advisors want de-escalation to relieve sanctions. Regional governors want resources diverted to domestic priorities. Intelligence officials want operational security restored after tonight's breach. Putin is balancing these demands while prosecuting a war that has already cost Russia over 300,000 casualties. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure, they're doing it from vulnerability. The bioweapon program was never meant to be exposed, it was meant to be a silent guarantee, a capability that Putin could reference in private negotiations without ever having to acknowledge publicly. Tonight, that capability is compromised and Putin's options are narrowing. NATO's emergency statement, now circulated to all member governments, was designed to signal that the alliance is not willing to accept the normalization of biological weapons development. Senior officials said plainly that Russia's actions were inconsistent with the foundational principles of international security and human dignity. That is diplomatic language for this crosses a line that cannot be tolerated. You don't usually hear that tone from NATO unless something existential is at stake, and biological weapons, especially ethnically targeted pathogens, are existential by definition. The statement also included language about maintaining all options for response, which intelligence analysts interpret as a signal that NATO is prepared to consider unprecedented countermeasures if Russia attempts to reconstitute the program. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation in a brief, measured speech tonight. He said, Ukraine will not allow weapons of mass destruction to be developed on the doorstep of Europe. He said, those who plan genocide will find no safety, not in bunkers, not in shadows, not anywhere. And he said, tonight, we have sent a message that Ukraine defends not only itself, but the entire civilized world. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Zelensky's speech was notable for what it did not say. There was no mention of the specific target, no operational details, no triumphalism, just a calm acknowledgement that Ukraine had acted and would continue to act to protect itself and its allies from unconventional threats. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's bioweapon development wasn't isolated. Along with the Winter Wave program, North Korea also accelerated its biological research cooperation with Russia over the past 6 months. Iran increased intelligence sharing related to pathogen research. China reduced its criticism of Russia's biological research activities, despite previously expressing concern through diplomatic channels. All of this happened within the same strategic window. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Intelligence officials are now examining whether the bioweapon program was part of a broader unconventional weapons coordination effort among adversarial states. If so, tonight's operation may have disrupted not just one program, but a network of interconnected capabilities. Western analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing to reconstitute the program at a different location, using decentralized research cells that are harder to target. Another is that Russia is attempting to use tonight's strike as propaganda, framing Ukraine as the aggressor to justify future escalation. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to accelerate remaining program elements before additional strikes can occur. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for confirmation from allies. They didn't wait for diplomatic protests to be lodged. They didn't wait for Russia to complete evacuation procedures. They struck with decisive force. And in doing so, they demonstrated that unconventional weapons development will not proceed without consequence. What we're watching now is a test of deterrence. Russia wants to see whether the West will accept gradual escalation toward prohibited weapons. Ukraine wants to show that such escalation will be met with immediate, devastating response. NATO wants to prevent the normalization of biological weapons in modern conflict. And the international community wants to prevent a precedent that would unravel decades of arms control agreements. The next 72 hours will be critical. Russia must decide whether to acknowledge the strike, deny it, or respond with escalation of its own. Each choice carries risks. And for the first time in months, Russia appears to be the one calculating consequences rather than imposing them. Tonight we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Russian military communications for signs of retaliation planning. They say Russian command structures are in disarray following the loss of General Morozov. They say replacement protocols for the winter wave program are unclear, as much of the institutional knowledge was concentrated in the eliminated command cell. And they say Russia's decision to develop ethnic targeting bioweapons is likely part of a broader unconventional deterrence strategy intended to offset conventional military losses. But Ukraine is not deterred. In fact, Ukraine is emboldened. Their response today, swift, precise, and strategically devastating, sent a message to Russia that capability development will not proceed unchallenged, and it sent a message to NATO that Ukraine remains the most effective frontline defense against Russian unconventional ambitions. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve with the winter wave program. But what we do know is that Western intelligence sharing was timely, it exposed the threat before deployment, it enabled Ukraine to act with precision, and it prevented what could have been a catastrophic escalation in the nature of this conflict. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the next 72 hours. If they attempt to reconstitute the program, this moment will be remembered as the opening of a new phase in unconventional warfare. If they step back, Ukraine and its allies have already shown they are prepared to maintain pressure. They have shown they are ready to respond. They have shown that the architects of prohibited weapons programs will not find sanctuary anywhere. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be on the defensive. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Russia is quiet, it means they're calculating, it means they're choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Russia learned something they have learned many times but continue to underestimate. Ukraine will not be intimidated. Ukraine will not be outmaneuvered. And Ukraine will not allow threats to its existence to develop unchallenged. This story is far from over, but tonight one thing is clear. The architect of Russia's bioweapon program is dead. The winter wave timeline is disrupted, and the world is watching to see what Moscow does next. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.